find the full bio on our website. And those of you who have yesterday already attended the close encounter also heard already an introduction. So in terms of the actual facts and publications, I cut this very short. You are here to hear Jack and not me, I know that. So Jack Halberstam is a professor of gender studies and English at Columbia. I know my voice is too loud without this already. So the publication list is quite long. I just pick a few. I think, from my perspective, most importantly at the beginning, female masculinity, of course, then a queer art of failure, and more recently, also, of course, wild things. Jack is currently finishing a follow-up volume, I understand, on the question of wildness, and that has to do, I understand, with the topic for today, namely unworlding. I would like, so I stop it here with the things that you can look up on your own. But I would like to bring up one thought that Jack shared with us yesterday in the close encounter. And I assume not all of you had the chance to attend that yesterday. I mean, there were more thoughts, obviously, I just picked one. And that was when you talked about that the ideas that you had, how did you put that? I never think alone. I always I thought these ideas with other people. That's kind of how you put it. Meaning, Jack was referring to what I would call a type of collaborative thinking, collaborative writing, in the sense that we always quote somebody else, or what you called yesterday, politics of citation. This very thought is very close to my own heart, but that's beyond the point. I think what's more relevant for right now and for Jack's work is, yes, that's a great approach, a politics of citation. But let's face it, when Jack started to embark on his academic career, a lot of the terms or classifications or categories for the work he was going to do were not yet available. Yes, you said you worked with work from others, but the traces were actually very slim, I assume, in the 90s. And what happened? Jack created those new terms. Jack introduced new meanings of old terms. To just mention, I mean, female masculinity, what did that mean in the 90s? Not a whole lot. Or your use of your, I think, redefinition of the term failure, or of wild, to just mention a few. And I see the current or today's topic of unworlding in the same trajectory. So without further ado, I don't want you to be bored with other references to yesterday's session. If you had to miss it, I pass the floor to Jack. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Gertrude, for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for being here. And my thanks especially to Joshua Toth for bringing us all together in this beautiful place for this amazing conference. I do think he deserves a round of applause. I'm sure we'll have another chance. So I'm really delighted to be here talking with you about this very complicated topic of nature that we've all come at from many different directions, some literary, some philosophical. I myself have tried to think about a kind of post-natural body under the heading of wildness in my book, Wild Things, to think about the way in which nature took the place, really, of God and religion by the end of the 19th century in terms of producing a discourse that would explain why certain bodies were wrong, right? So if an earlier discourse had relied upon a kind of theological sensibility in which sodomites were sinners, this new discourse of the 19th century and ushered in the idea of the unnatural. And so nature became a new way of adjudicating the right and the wrong, the normal and the aberrant, and so on. So that's just to say that nature has been an important part of the way that I've been thinking about the body. And I think what I want to introduce today is some more language from this deep dive into wildness that I have begun, that is both an engagement with nature, but also a kind of recognition, and we've heard a lot about this at this conference, that there are all kinds of experiences and phenomena in the world that we live in that exceed human comprehension, okay? So while there was a mania for classification at the end of the 19th century, there were massive amounts of human behavior that simply escaped the scientists and the philosophers' ken, let alone the psychologists. And I just very provisionally gave the name for that which escapes these knowledge systems. I gave it the term wild, both because wild is produced within colonial discourses as the opposite of civilization, but also because the very definition of the wild brings the concept of the human into proximity with the animal and asks what the human and the non-human animal might share. And so I'll return to wild things a little bit later on. But I want to start by proposing that in some ways the sciences, and people like Cressida have written about this, the sciences have been more effective and more efficient in describing and talking about and grasping for this range of phenomena beyond human ken than the humanities have. Now, I'm sure there are lots of philosophical areas that I don't know about that do just this, that try deeply to struggle with questions of indeterminacy. But science has an entire field dedicated, basically, an entire field, we might add, to what we do not know, to what we do not know. And just to give you an example of this, I don't know what that is, but it's something to do with quantum physics. And I was thinking about this recently when I was reading an amazing new book by a Chilean journalist called Benjamin Labatut, and it's called When We Cease to Understand the World. And I'm hoping that this idea that when we cease to understand the world is a kind of portal, if you like, to what I'm going to call unworlding, that this will then make some sense. So building really on Claire's talk from yesterday and some of the material that came up in her close encounter today, we realize that there's no point investing in some sort of utopian project at the moment because we can't imagine something else until we unmake this system, this epistemological frame, this way of being that we have given the name world to. So we're going to have to figure out, philosophically speaking, ideologically speaking, politically speaking, socially speaking, how to unworld. And only then would we be in a position to start thinking outside of all of these frameworks that we have inherited, mostly from colonialism, the afterlife of slavery, and Western philosophy. We have to break out of those structures, those hegemonic structures, or all there is to do is to keep reproducing the same frame over and over again, within which we rearrange the furniture, but the frame remains intact. So I was thinking about this when I was reading this fantastic book. I don't really know how to describe it. It's both philosophy and literature, which is why I'm sort of beginning with it. It's a series of fictional, experimental pieces of writing about famous scientists from the 20th century who changed the way humans think while bringing us to the brink of destruction, because lots of that thought that went on under the heading of indeterminacy and uncertainty also led in the direction of splitting the atom and nuclear destruction, right? So he thinks about walking this fine line between pushing philosophy to its absolute outer limit and also discovering that massively dangerous material capable of world destruction. And so there's a chapter, he proposes that these thinkers, and they include all kinds of people, some of whom you all have heard about, like Schrödinger and Heisenberg and Einstein, and some of whom you will not, who are just weird mathematicians who locked themselves in their room and wrote weird work that only one other person in the world could really interpret. But that's what I mean about scientists on a regular basis engaging with material in a way that makes no sense and that they cannot explain to anybody else. Whereas we're, and I'm very guilty of this, we're pretty committed to explanation. That's exactly what I'm doing here. And whenever we explain, we reduce down the complexity, and that becomes a problem. But what Labuteau proposes is that quantum mechanics is, quote, the crown jewel of our species, he says, the most accurate, far-ranging, and beautiful of all of our physical theories. And then he also says, and yet, it has completely reshaped our world. We know how to use it. It works as if by some strange miracle, and yet, there is not a human soul, alive or dead, who actually gets it. The mind cannot come to grips with its paradoxes and contradictions. It's as if the theory had fallen to earth from another planet, and we simply scamper around it like apes, toying and playing with it, but with no true understanding. So this is kind of a remarkable statement, philosophically speaking, that we could be so rearranged and disordered by this shift in consciousness that was kind of ushered in by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And it was Heisenberg's uncertainty principle that led Einstein to say, no way, I don't believe this, God does not play dice with the universe, because Heisenberg was like, you know, chance, randomness, that's as much of an element, entropy, these things are as important to human life and enterprise as determinacy, certainty, knowing, okay, predicting. The things that we have built, you know, our philosophical structures on, for the most part, are in many ways without their other lexicons, the other lexicons that are equally important to understanding, and more importantly, not understanding the world, right? And if we don't push towards these uncertainty principles, then instead we tell each other stories that are comforting, but actually have nothing to do with various rules, sequences, logics, and algorithms that govern us. Okay, so I offer this not because I'm going to give a lecture on quantum mechanics, which I cannot, luckily for everybody, but just to say that, like Labuteau, we too should be engaging in experiments with the categories that have been pushed to the side of some of our philosophical schools. And I know that there are entire philosophical schools committed to things like uncertainty, indeterminacy, and collapse. But at the same time, we're not as adept with these classifications as we are with, I don't know, progress, improvement, development, hope, making things better, right? All the different concatenations of sense that fall into place because we accept one set of logical principles. So, in what follows, I'm going to try to experiment a little bit with a different lexicon in order to join efforts with Claire's great talk last night, thinking about not any longer why we can't imagine the end of the world, but why we are constantly faced with the imaginary of the end of the world and what to do with that. So in my book, Wild Things, I don't know if I have, yes I do, I propose that there are all kinds of phenomena, and this is my little uncertainty principle, that fall out of their proper place in the world. And by doing concepts that ground what we think of as world. And I gave numerous examples of this. I said the reason that we love a book like Where the Wild Things Are when we're young is because wildness is so much a part of children's worlds. But what adulthood is the tidying up of the entropic field that is childhood into, on behalf of these normative narratives about becoming. Okay, so I showed the way in which the pull of the wild is very strong for the child, but in that narrative, the pull of the colonial is just as strong. And so just as Max voyages out to where the wild things are, he also, once he's been made king of the wild things, which seems like a huge misstep when you go into the wild to become the sovereign subject, right? He journeys back to take his rightful place in society as a little white man to be, right? So it's also a colonial narrative. I also talked about an Indigenous artist who many people in Canada will know, Kent Monkman, who counter-appropriates European modern art and creates what I call ripples of bewilderment by showing that modern art is just a kind of rip-off of Indigenous art. So that whole kind of primitive tradition versus the modern narrative that we have is bullshit. There's nothing new in the modern, and Monkman has entire canvases showing what has been taken from Indigenous art in order to produce the new. And there's a hilarious canvas of Pollock falling backwards and looking as his paintbrush spatters onto a canvas made by an Indigenous person that is blotched with various kinds of patterns, and Pollock going, aha, you know. So this whole like reversal of the sequencing of things is part of what I call in the book bewilderment. There are also narratives, if you care to look for them in the book, about queer subjects who we would read as gay, but for whom their greatest desire, sexual, erotic, and otherwise, was to become a wild bird, okay? That sounds ridiculous, I know, but if you even just think about falconry is a kind of fetishistic activity par excellence. The little, right, in falconry, you hold a bird on your arm, you have a huge leather glove on, the bird has little chaps on, okay? And you put a hood on it, I kid you not, a leather hood, mind you, that's been handcrafted. I mean, and you may as well be going off to the tunnel, you know, the local leather bar at that point. And indeed, there's this whole group of people we call gay men who wrote all these wild narratives about wanting to become wild, not in a Deleuzean sense. They didn't want to engage in becoming wild. They just wanted to be falcons. And they wrote these crazy narratives about like following falcons around and finding themselves on the ground baiting over rats and so on. What's that? That's not queer. That's not gay. That's wild. And it's a kind of narrative that we have no place for and that we therefore push to the side and say these subjects are not worthy to write about, right? This is a minor literature. And then the book ends with a polemic against pet owning. Don't get me started. Just like, what's the opposite of the wild? The pet. And what's, you know, the worst part of the pet owner, who really believes that they are doing something for this animal. This conceit is part of what I call kind of zombie humanism. A humanism that turns everything in the world into an accessory by which one's benevolence and goodness can be measured, right? So there you go. You know, there's a lot in there, but I compile these weird narratives on behalf of a kind of unraveling of just so stories, using that kind of Rudyard Kipling colonial narrative, just so stories that fit so beautifully into current epistemes that they seem right and true, but must be challenged. In the same way that these scientists that Benjamin Lavertu wrote about had to risk ridicule and accusations of insanity in order to say there is phenomena out there that we can't measure. That was one of Heisenberg's claims that he confronted Schrödinger about. You think that this is a particle, it isn't, it's a wave. Because it's a wave, there's no way to measure it, right? So those kinds of ideas sound insane when they're offered out of their time, but they come to be principles with a certain kind of, I'm not going to say truth value, but some kind of value in the world that we haven't paid careful enough attention to. Why not? Because we live in universities that demand the separation of the humanities from the sciences in ways that make it impossible to actually join some of these endeavors together. And if we're in the business of unworlding, we could do worse than to start with university and start completely, my talk is all about tearing down. There's no building up, there's no making things nice. I'm just in the business of destruction and ruination. And so why don't we start? Okay, so let's see what ruination can actually look like if somebody was smart about how to think with it. Anna Singh, of course, The Mushroom at the End of the World. This is a book that really got me thinking about unworlding. And in the book, Anna Singh says, the ruin glares at us with the horror of its abandonment. It is not easy to know how to make alive, much less avert planetary destruction. What is this book about? This book is about forms of life that thrive in the aftermath of destruction, right? So this is one way of thinking about worlding and unworlding. In order to live with the specter of planetary destruction, learn how to make life in the ruins, okay? How do you do that? Look around, says Anna Singh. There are all kinds of forms of life, fungal in particular, that thrive where other plant life has failed, and only thrive where other plant life has failed. So the Matsutake mushroom requires that entire forests have failed to thrive in order for it to begin its journey. So where one kind of oak dies due to parasites and infections and viruses that spread through the tree colonies, that's where the Matsutake mushroom takes root. And one of the things that Singh says is that the Matsutake mushroom is an entity, she says, that shows a willingness to emerge in blasted landscapes. I just love that idea that she is assigning a kind of agency to the mushroom. She doesn't say, hey, if you look in these areas, you'll find mushrooms. She says, the Matsutake mushroom is my protagonist, and the Matsutake mushroom is very willing to thrive in areas that other plant life has abandoned. And that's a good way to write about nature with, in Jane Bennett's terms, a kind of some sort of vibrancy that does not solidify per se, but at certain moments it pulls into a form of agency. And something is made to happen by that form of life, right? Not because of human intervention, not because the human made space for it and grew it. Despite the human, the mushroom is able to pick its moment and its space and issue forth. And once there, she says that it facilitates new ecosystems collaboratively with other plant life and other trees and so on. And it then, this mushroom, instructs human foragers on how to coexist with it. Instructs human foragers. Okay, so then she does an ethnography, not of the human foragers, but of the mushrooms within a supply chain, within commodity capitalism, and also beyond capitalism in non-capitalist communities that grow off the grid through the possibilities that the mushrooms afford. So there are projects, there are absolutely projects out there that can unthink world and begin to take us into a different relationship to nature, and this is one of them. And I just want to give you this beautiful image I found of the Matsutake mushroom, because to me these mushrooms look like a kind of strange alphabet that we don't know how to read, and that Anna Singh somehow, by in this kind of Donna Haraway science fictional way, she followed the journey of the mushroom without presuppositions about what the mushroom did or was or knew or could do or could not do. And it's these kinds of narratives that I believe are crucial to the activity that I'm going to call unworlding. Okay, what is unworlding? Unworlding is not anti-utopian, you know, and I made that point, I think, in the beginning by saying, yes, of course, we're going to have to invest in some kind of utopian project if we want to get rid of everything. But we're not there yet, not yet, right? So it is more along the lines of what Jose Munoz, building on Fred Jameson, called anti-utopian. Okay? It's not utopian, but it's not anti-utopian. It is anti-utopian, okay? That seems right for an un-category, that it would be anti-anti. So that's where we're going to go with it. And yesterday, I think it was Josh, asked a question of Claire at the end of the keynote and said, well, aren't some of these narratives about what happens after the end of the world, aren't they already there in science fiction? And the answer is, yes, they are. Yes, they are. So let's look at one of my favorite science fiction series that is deeply preoccupied with breaking worlds and unworlding. You probably already know where we're going with this, which is the 5th season in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jameson. This is an unworlding series. It's called The Broken Earth, and the mechanism by which the whole series proceeds is one in which a group of people who have evolved to, with the skills to still an ever-quaking world, rise up in rebellion and decide to unworld. That's the conceit of the book, okay? So sometime in the future, the world is so shaky that it is constantly completely and utterly unstable for human life, right? A group of people who in the novel is sort of both an elite class of people because they have this skill, but also a slave class because they are managed by a management group called the Guardians. This group holds the earth quiet so that humans can survive. And however, they, over the course of the narrative, decide that they don't want to make this earth good for a ruinous political enterprise, okay? So they decide to unworld. So in the 5th season, the main character is also a broken character called Cyan, but also called Esun, but also called Damaya, okay? And many of the characters have multiple names, and that's part of what it means to live in a broken world, is to not be a singular individual subject, but to go by many names and have many functions and live many lives. So Cyan, let's call her at this moment, who can control these earthquakes, move stones with her mind, quell ecological unrest. At the end of the novel, she comes to see her mentor, Alabasta. Alabasta, who's named for a white stone but is actually black. Cyan is also black, and black means something in the novel, but it isn't simply the other to whiteness, and so on. Her teacher wants to impart some wisdom to Cyan before he dies. He explains to her that he has gone against the Guardians who manage them. He has created disorder when they requested stability. He has ripped up the earth when they asked him if he would put things back together again. And he has created a rift in the earth's surface when they asked him to heal it, okay? So he says, I've defied everything, I've broken free, and now here I am, dying, being eaten alive by stone, turning back into stone. So he says, Cyan, I'm gonna die and I need your help. She's like, okay, what can I do? Do you want me to fix all these things? Everything's gone wrong, I know. I'm gonna fix it. She leans in and he says, I don't want you to fix it. What I want you to do is make it worse. And that's actually a pretty good proposal. Okay, you gotta read book 2 to find out what happens in terms of making it worse. But I love this idea, and I know this sounds so horrible and mean-spirited, but I think we have to work against the reparative. And Claire said something similar today. in terms of not investing in the redemptive. Why would we work against the reparative? Because if you're in a shitty, broken system, and you commit to it's wrong, and then my conclusion will be, it's wrong. And that's a paranoid reading. It's tautological, and you go around and around. She says that we do that in order to guard against surprise and enchantment. And the reparative was designed, in her understanding, to be amazed by those moments when we cease to understand the world, right? Because paranoia knows everything. You know everything. If you're paranoid, you've already figured out the whole system, and you can explain every single element of it according to your paranoid ideation. That's a better way of thinking about the reparative. But in typical Sedgwickian form, she didn't say stop being paranoid. She says paranoia knows some things well and others poorly. And I'm interested in this project in what paranoia knows well. I'm not interested in the reparative, and I think there'll be a time for the reparative, but we're going to push on into a paranoid read, a read that comes right out of N.K. Jemisin, and on behalf of Making Things Worse, a reading that knows that what we have called world has been made by colonialism, by the afterlife of slavery, and by capitalism, by family-based patriarchy, by white supremacy, and so on. All of that content is world. So, how are we going to find effective critiques of world on behalf of making things worse and pulling world down? Now, I'll return to this in a moment, but probably the most effective criticism of world comes from Afro-pessimism, not surprisingly. And you could read that moment in N.K. Jemisin's 5th season, Make It Worse. That is an Afro-pessimist statement, simply and purely. The Afro-pessimists say, if this world has been created by white people, for white people, let's destroy it. Let's destroy this world. Let's not ask to be included. Let's not find our spot in it. This world has to stop. And by the way, there are all kinds of people who want to stop the world, not only Afro-pessimists. So let's say Afro-pessimist and Afro-pessimist adjacent thinkers want to stop this world. Now, how would you do that? It probably has something to do with Heidegger, I'm afraid. And I'm going to have to ask Claire to help me with that. I've never wanted to read Heidegger for all kinds of reasons. But as people keep saying to me, if you're going to write about world and you want to push against world, you'll have to go there, right? So I'm not going to go there, but Denise De Silva can. Okay, so Denise De Silva, as you all know, I'm sure, is a Black Canadian / Brazilian philosopher who has made it her mission in books like A Global Theory of Race to do the hard work of reading Western philosophy, Hegel, Kant, Heidegger, Derrida, and so on, and using Fanon, Moten, and others against that tradition to unmake that epistemological system produced by that body of thinkers. And her proposal is, in this new book, Unpayable Debt, is that we have to look for rips and tears and fissures in the social order and then produce a philosophy robust enough to think with those places where the current philosophy comes undone. And why would we do that? As far as she's concerned, you would have to do that to even think into being a Black subject. And she gives us the Du Bois line, between me and the world, there is an unasked question. Remember, Du Bois writes, between me and the world is an unasked question. She says, it's all there in that line. Why does Du Bois have to say between me and the world? Why is he not in the world? He clearly doesn't think of himself as in the world. And the reason that he's not in the world is the unasked question of sociology and philosophy. And therefore, world is a system of thought that can make sense as long as something is excluded from it. And as many, many philosophers like the late Lyndon Barrett has shown, Western philosophy has produced an entire system of thought that assigns values across bodies and assigns the value of nothing to the black body. Okay? And that whole idea is taken up by Calvin Warren in a deep dive into Heidegger. We'll get to Calvin Warren in one moment. But Denise De Silva realizes that she can't get where she's going, thinking about world or unworld or other world in terms of black subjects through Western philosophy. She has to take it down, deconstruct it, tear it apart, rip it to shreds, and then go to Octavia Butler. So that's what she does. So she goes to Kindred, and she talks about that moment in Kindred when Dana puts her hand through the wall to go back in time. And when she goes back in time, she revisits the past in which a white slave owner will rape a black woman, and that black woman will be her ancestor, and therefore she will come into being. And at one moment she has to decide whether to save. She has the opportunity to save her great-great-grandfather from dying. And that's what she means by an unpayable debt. She has to choose to save him, because otherwise she will not be born. But what she's saving is an entire system that she wants to tear down. So she uses this term, unpayable debt, to talk about the fact that the last time that Diana comes out of the past, the wall claims her arm. She can't get, so, and I'm going to return to the cut later on. This arm is left in the wall. And that's the debt that black people and indigenous people have been given to pay that is not theirs to pay, right? And that, therefore, they must not pay. And she says, though, that in those moments where the wall opens and rifts occur and the earth shakes and there are fissures in the way in which we think, in those moments, there's another world. She says that world is a future world and a past world. It is even a virtual world, or not a world at all. It is a possible world, perhaps one among many possible and not probable worlds. And as such, it is nothing like a world, because it neither produces nor posits nor presumes something like a subject, whether transparent or affectable. So I let the philosophers think in the room think about what it would mean to have a world without a subject, because that is the proposal of unpayable debt. Okay, so this is not the utopian dream of another world is possible, because we don't want just another world to play our dramas out on. What we also want is to unworld, and to unworld in order to crack these philosophical traditions that have made it impossible to break away from the presumed equation of whiteness and humanity. And that's De Silva's point. And so she moves Kant and Heidegger around until she arrives at Octavia Butler and then begins to tear it all down. All right, speaking about tearing things down and making them worse, I'm going to return for a moment to the fifth season, and then I'll quickly look at some examples of artists who work in really, really fascinating ways with collapse to tell us something different about building and unbuilding. So the concept of unworlding, as it plays out in both the fifth season and in De Silva's work, proposes that for some people, world is always coming undone. So it's not a question of like, wow, why would you do that? Why would you be invested in destroying world? Well, for many people, world is always unstable. It's like that shaking earth in the fifth season. So just as an example, there's a whole series recently in the New York Times about Haiti, and about the way in which Haiti has been undone over and over again over the past 200 years because it's been punished for the slave rebellion that happened in the 18th century before the French Revolution, right? So you would think that in the wake of a slave rebellion, Haiti would be given reparations for having had its people enslaved. No, the aftermath of the slave rebellion in Haiti was that France demanded that Haiti pay France for its lost revenue from slavery. And that has continued on with disastrous consequences for Haiti over the past 200 years, to the point where Haiti has been ruined both by this unpayable debt and then by various US interventions. And you can think about this in terms of a different kind of nation that has been asked to pay debts. Germany. Germany was also told you must pay reparations after World War II for this destruction that you have wreaked across the globe. But we'll forgive them quickly because communism is more of a threat right now, right? Haiti's debts were not forgiven, Germany's were. So if we're questioning whether there is this thing, world, look to debt. Look to debt, as Dave Graeber did, as many people have done, for a different history of capitalism and a history of the way in which, despite all kinds of evidence of abundance, many people are kept in this narrative of unpayable debt. Because of this, N.K. Jameson's novel imagines a kind of whole-scale refusal to pay the debt that the origins are being asked to pay in the novel. And so Alberta contemplates the fact that when he says that thing to Cyan, make it worse, his point is, I can't save this world, but I can make the destruction of it serve a higher purpose. So at a certain moment, he looks at the city that he stands above. He takes all that, the strut and the magma and the people and the power in his imaginary hands, everything. He holds it. He is not alone. The earth is with him, then he breaks it. Okay? It's this beautiful moment, very like the Anna Singh idea of working with the mushrooms, in which Alabaster is working with the earth, on behalf of the earth, and yes, against the world that cannot live in this instability. Nobody would probably call N.K. Jameson an Afro-pessimist, but it is impossible not to hear someone like Calvin Warren's amazing argument from ontological terror, blackness, nihilism, and emancipation, where he proposes that there is no solution to the problem of anti-blackness. It will continue without end as long as the world exists. That's a line from the book. And his big argument is with Heidegger is like, Heidegger's got all of this material on nothing, but doesn't get that there is a value already assigned to nothing. And that value is blackness. And what difference, he asks, would it make if Heidegger factored in blackness to his understanding of nothing? It's very much the question that Alex Wahalia asks of Agamben in relationship to bare life. He says, okay, you've written a whole book on bare life, you've never mentioned slavery. A whole book on bare life, you've never mentioned slavery. What difference would it make if bare life began not with the camps, but with slavery, right? So you can see this theme throughout this work in Black Studies, in which we have to break out of this world in order for freedom to even be imaginable. What is freedom? Freedom will constitute a form of world destruction. Okay, so on behalf of that, do I have a political project for us? I don't. As I said yesterday at my close encounter, Veronica Gago does have one. She's an Argentinian feminist. She's written a book called The Feminist International, and blow by blow, chapter by chapter, she takes us through what it will take to, and this is her subtitle, change everything. And she honestly does know how to do this. She gets people into the street every single day in Argentina, and they have changed the political order of things in Argentina through their principled and brilliant anti-intuitive protests. So that said, I'm just going to show you a few pieces from some work that I've been looking at in the 1970s that has built its entire kind of aesthetic principle and language around collapse. Why? Because we do need to hold on to something while imagining what collapse looks like. And the work that first brought me to this was the work of Gordon Matta Clark, a Chilean, came from a Chilean immigrant family, lived in New York 70s, went off, and this is for the grad students in the room, he went off to graduate school at Cornell, studied architecture, said thank you very much with his architecture degree, came back to New York City and founded an art group called the An Architecture Group, An Architecture. And they proceeded to unbuild everything, okay? And his mentor was so pissed off with him, Peter Eisenman, he never spoke to capitalism, that we now live with, that is ruinous to younger generations, and that delivers massive amounts of money to real estate corporations, to banks in the forms of extortionate loans, improper loans, insurance-backed loans, and so on. He saw that, Matt Clark did, and he began pulling down houses, or more importantly, splitting houses, so that they fell apart and fell open. So that what I like to say about a work like this is the artwork is that sliver of nothing that you see in the center that he's opened up. It's this. It's a reminder that the house is nothing. The value of the house is pure gambling, pure speculative investment. And the actual house serves only to ground certain fictions of subjects, families, being, ownership, property, possession, right? So he splits the thing apart, pushes it back on its foundation, and it sits there, fallen open, right? So it's those kinds of gestures that, to me, are super instructive about people having thought about unworlding for a long time. But let's get back to this idea of a kind of unworlding that comes out of a Black radical tradition. And this is an artist who I'm willing to guess very few people know, a very minor artist, Beverly Buchanan, a queer Black woman who made her way to New York City in the 1970s to be a medical worker, public health worker. She signed up at Columbia for classes. She went to an art class at the same time, ditched Columbia, it's like that same gesture that Gordon Matt Clark made, ditched Columbia and decided, I'm going to become an artist. That's what I'm going to do. How did she become an artist? She wandered around New York City's demolition sites and found pieces like this that had remained after the building had been brought down, right? And this is what she had to say about them. On the left is one of her city ruins where she would paint with black paint onto canvases to try to say something about Blackness and architecture. But this is what she said about the bits that she picked up at demolition sites. This is, to me, this is like a founding principle for our unworlding society. Okay. She said, my interest in walls involves the concept of urban walls when they're in various stages of decay. Walls as part of the landscape. Often, when buildings are in a state of demolition, one or two structural pieces, frustula is the term for structural pieces that remain after demolition, stand out that otherwise never would have been created. I'll say what that means in a moment. This state of demolition presents a new type of artificial structural system that by itself, in its undemolished state, would not exist. These discards or piles of rubble can be pulled together to form new systems. These new systems are very personal statements to me. They are inspired by urban ruins, but are created in my own image, by me, in concrete, painted with dark paint, and deceptively they appear to be black. And then apropos of nothing, one of my dreams is to place fragments in tall grass where a house once stood, but where now only chimney bricks remain. Wow, okay, so what is she actually saying? She's saying that when a wrecking ball hits the building and it goes down, the way that the building's being built means that some pieces remain standing, okay? And probably not accidental as to what pieces do remain standing. And those pieces, she said, never would have been created. Like you couldn't, as an artist, sculpturally manufacture those pieces. They have to be created through demolition. And so the demolition is itself the artist or the aesthetic gesture. And why is this important? Because it presents a new type of artificial system, one through which these pieces can be pulled together in a new system to create new statements. And what I'm saying is that there's a semiotics within collapse and within demolition that we somehow have to learn how to read the same way that Anna Singh somehow learned the language of the matsutake mushroom, right? So that when you see the bits and pieces that remain from a demolition, you just think, oh dear, you know, that's too bad that that house fell down. But maybe there's something else to read in the collapsed form. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I mean by an aesthetics of collapse. Just to connect this, and she went on to do all kinds of other work like these boulders that she placed in marshes in Georgia as monuments to former slaves who had been brought to these areas, and there are no monuments there to slavery. So I'm going to just move on to one last artist and then conclude by talking about some trans bodies that are unbuilt by unworlding gestures. And I'll just say this quickly because I've written quite a bit now about this guy, Alvin Baltrop, another black queer artist working in New York City in the same time, the 1970s, also looking at images of collapse. He became known because he took, I mean, look at this amazing image, right? And the gay male commentators on Baltrop have said, he's an amazing commentator on gay male cruising in the piers. The piers, as you know, were on the west side of New York City in the 1970s, left over from a failed shipping industry, and they were abandoned by industry, by the police, by law and order, and became cruising grounds for gay men, drug dealers, dispossessed people, homeless people, and so on. And they just gradually began to collapse. And his work is just read as a document of gay men. But I'm like, look at how little the bodies of the humans are in these photographs. They are always diminished in his photographs. You can say that's practical because he had to be a long way away and he didn't have good lenses and whatever it may be. But nonetheless, the drama in the photograph is the collapsing pier behind. And we've just been told by Beverly Buchanan to try to read for new systems that emerge that could never have been created, but are available to us when we look at how things fall down. Entropy, the organic winding down of something as it moves towards the ground. Gravity, that's what gravity looks like. He became famous because he took pictures of Gordon Matta Clark's work, and people would be like, oh, that's Gordon Matta Clark. Well, the photograph is Alvin Baltrop, okay? And he did take this gorgeous picture of one of Gordon Matta Clark's most famous works, Day's End, that built an opening into the side of the pier and into the ground of the pier so that light would bounce in and ricochet around the pier, creating a kind of temple or something. It was a beautiful effect. But it's Alvin Baltrop who's deeply drawn to these architectural images. And here's another one. There is an image of gay men having sex in this photograph. You probably can barely even see it. But Baltrop always puts his men in the dead center, so that white figure, that's a sexual encounter. But the distance makes it a kind of insignificant part of the photograph. Instead, I would say that he's drawing our attention to an erotics of collapse, to an eros that is shared across these architectures, these terrains, this landscape, right, as Beverly Buchanan put it, in terms of these collapsing walls. All right, here's a final one. There's your blowjob if that's what you came for. But you can only get to it through the all these girders beautifully arranging the human body as intersected by multiple other architectural forces. All right, so let me conclude then by suggesting that there's a whole strand of trans art that has not been interested in building bodies, in simply, you know, making a body assigned female at birth look male, or vice versa, right? There's a whole strand of trans aesthetics that is about, I'm cheekily calling it detransitions, just as a nod to Tori Peters' wonderful novel, Detransition Baby, but just to suggest that, for example, in Akwaeke Emese's brilliant novel/memoir, the protagonist has gender-affirming surgeries and so on, and lives as a non-binary person but mostly lives in a body in which it's Nigerian cosmologies that narrate the principle of self. And the self is many different selves jostling for space in one body, spirits. And they write that the body is constantly being broken apart by trans-surgeries, by the spirits within it, by life. And they propose to us that when you break something, you must study the pattern of its shattering before you can piece it back together again. This is a piece by Black gay artist Adam Pendleton, who's a Dada artist who tries to take language apart in order to make it mean something else. And I love this architectural, sculptural painting in which the letters that spell out "we are not" are paraded in black on a white canvas. Again, a kind of unworlding gesture that's very much working with Fred Moten's articulation of a black aesthetic as sort of the opposite of everything that white aesthetics have been composed of, like harmony and principles of fusion and so on. Two final artists. These pieces are by Kean Williams, who, like Beverly Buchanan, was deeply interested in the things that society had discarded, mostly in dirt, and in building these sculptural forms out of dirt that are of the earth and emerge from the earth. And this is a beautiful sculpture that appeared in the Sculpture Garden in Queens. This is one of their performances called Dirt Eater, where he sort of pays homage to the way in which blackness, nothingness, dirt has been, played out as a kind of sequence of meaning making. And then finally, this is the one that will really resonate with Beverly Buchanan and Alvin Beltrop. This one is called An Accumulation of Things That Refuse to Be Discarded. And it's rocks gathered, it's bricks gathered from a low-income housing site that had been demolished. And he creates a whole new kind of trans body out of it by putting that face, the mask on the top, and suggesting that the body sort of cascades down as a series of fragments that hang on a frame. Finally, and this is like a huge leap, but this is another, my final example of an unworlding trans artist is Linus Borgo, who in his debut show called I'll Grow Back Like a Starfish offered this gorgeous painting called Autotomy in the Liminal Realm, splitting time with a scalpel. And I just want to spend 1 minute in conclusion with this gorgeous painting. It'll Grow Back Like a Starfish is a reference to Cripple and the Starfish by Anthony and the Johnsons, which was the basis of a very important essay by Eva Haywood, in which she argues that the cut for the trans body is its most important gesture, is the most important way of understanding a trans body. That the trans body is made through a series of cuts. It is literally dismantled. And basically Linus takes this and builds upon a Renaissance painting of the Deposition of Christ by Jacopo Carucci Pontomo, and instead offers this gorgeous painting of the trans man coming out of surgery, but also you'll notice the arm. Linus is somebody who lives with the disability of an amputated arm. And so there's a kind of reading of disability and trans through the same body. But also remember Dana's arm stuck in the wall, right? An autotomy means what a starfish or an octopus does when it's endangered. So when an octopus has its arm in a dangerous position, it lets go of it. That's autotomy. So I want us to think about autotomy, amputations, castrations, surgeries, and so on behalf of not knowing whether gender has been confirmed or denied in these bodies, made, sculpted, unbuilt, unworlded. The painting doesn't answer these questions, instead it floats, and certainly in time it's locatable in either, and in the background is not a hospital, not a surgical theatre, not an institution. The center of the painting, please look down beneath his robe, we see a void. Not God or religion, but world. Not world even, but unworld. The unworld of the other world in the corner. These trans bodies, all of them open and fragment and part of a new unworld. Thank you.
Are you good to?
Yeah, if people want to have
I
an
get
argument
crazy all the
or
time.
discussion or... Yes?
So I have a question just kind of inspired by this last section, and also the part about art and architecture and unmaking, and about kind of scars. So in terms of like, you know, trans body and surgery, whatever that means, like body or bottom or top, there's often this scar left over by what is taken away. Same too with these kinds of pictures of the architecture, you don't necessarily see, you know, the form of what once was, but what is left there, what is, you know, what refuses to be discarded. The kind of scar, whether that be of a construction that way or the kind of bodily scar. And I'm just wondering if you could say more on that.
That's lovely. Yeah, that's just really nice. That's exactly right. So that by the time, say, a Gordon Clark is taken apart a building, you actually don't always know what was there. You know, it wasn't clear what the 17th century building in Paris looked like before he put the conical shape into its middle, it's true. And so instead there is a scar, and these scars are not scars that disappear, you know, any more than they ever disappear from a trans body. They're the mark of a cutting and an unmaking. That is the principle of this unmolding. So I do think, and it's a big part of the Ava Hayward essay, is to think about scars, not be so focused on, you know, did that person have a vagina made, or did that person have a penis? You know, there's so many articles right now about people having penises built, and the New York Times and New York Magazine endlessly, fetishistically, you know, obsessing over trans people's genitalia, when you're right, the scar is what requires the reading. You know, the gendering of the body is there to be read in this new matrix of meaning that the scar represents. So I love that comment. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm still struggling with the idea of making things worse. So, if I take it to a conclusion, like if someone came up to me with a climate change, like we've been talking a lot about here, and they're like, "Well, you know, let's not make it better. Let's just throw more junk out there, destroy the whole fucking thing. You know, the universe will take all these little pieces and it'll make something, you know, a new kind of beauty out of it. New things will emerge." But I'd still probably want to try to fix it, you know. And I can't figure out if I'm part of the problem or part of the solution, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's less practical than that, to be honest with you. It's less pragmatic than, you know, what he's saying, that we should just, you know, be junking everything. No, it's more a principle in which we are driven to make things better that can't be made better. And so the principle here is in a way to stop. And that's the very, very difficult thing to do, because we're all on this car careening out of control, going very fast. And so this is why Veronica Gago's notion of the strike is an important one, because a strike isn't a doing, it's a stopping. You know, you cease, you stop work, you refuse, you hold things up. And I think that's the principle behind making it worse, is not to say let's keep going on the road that we're on and in the practices that we're engaged. It's more, let's stop trying to make things better. Because just think about all the causes that travel under the heading of greed that are just money makers, right? That's the kind of the liberal cycle that we're in, where the things that are supposed to be the fix very, very seamlessly slide into being the problem, as you said. So that's why we have to also take apart, which is what I presume, you know, these some of our gatherings are about, under the heading of philosophy and literatures, to look for glimmers of other systems of meaning making that are not this one, and that do not constantly return us to this spot, and to these practices, and to this understanding. So there's a lot of, I'm almost trying to go for inertia, you know, try to slow things down somehow. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Can we return to Gordon Matta Clark?
Yes.
Because that interests me a lot, as it is, but also in this context. And I'd like to ask you and help me understand, because I never understood his last work, The Circus.
The circus, the one in...
the one in Chicago.
Oh, the one in Chicago. Was it the office building?
No, it was, you know, it was next to, I believe it was next to the museum.
Yeah.
Right? And they wanted to build an extension. And so there was this building there that they wanted to tear down. And Matta Clark at the time was a really, you know, important figure. So they asked him to do a piece there. And he said yes. The difference between that work and the ones he did before is that all of the other work he did illegally.
Yeah.
He just went into places and cut them up and did all kinds of things, and then they documented them, and then they became pieces afterwards.
Yeah.
So they weren't really made sort of within the art. They weren't commissioned, right? Or didn't have any. But with the circus, things were different.
Yeah.
Because then he began to coordinate with authorities. He needed permits. He needed contracts.
Yeah.
They needed to put up safety things. And actually, I think some of the directors of the museum fell down, and there was a huge furor about it. But you know, all of a sudden, he began to, I don't know. I mean, in your context, is he regressing into the world again, or is he beginning to work with authorities and institutions, electrical companies, security, all that stuff, in order to do something also with that? I never really figured that out.
I mean, we can chat about this later, but I know exactly what you mean, and the hard thing for an artist like Matta Clark was it was remarkably difficult for him to make money from these projects, and the thing is, you can't actually do a lot of this work without some kind of money coming in. What people may not know is Matta Clark had a remarkably short career because he died at the age of 35. It was like between 72 and 76, and then he died. That was it. And so we don't know what would have happened. Would he have begun on this path towards a kind of corporate collaboration? Because when he went into the piers, it was illegal. He was not supposed to be there. He padlocked the area where he was working so that people would come and cruise there at night and fall into the water. And this made folks like Douglas Crimp wrote a whole piece about him being, homophobic because he was roping off parts of the piers from the perverts and so on. When in fact, it's really precarious to work like that as well. So I think that's the problem. This is part of what we're calling the world, the tendency to start on the outside and end up on the inside, and how difficult it is to hold on to this position of exteriority that we're so enamored with, and yet that it's so hard to stay there. And that's just an example of the way in which that which is radical today is tomorrow paid for by corporate America. I think it's not hard to understand, but there was other stuff Matta Clark was doing at the end of his life as well that was way more interesting and was much closer to the Anna Singh stuff. He began making these kind of pod-like enclosures and hanging himself from trees in these pods and exploring fungal life and growing kind of weird mushroom sculptures. So there was other stuff going on as well. The only reason we know any of this is because his wife casually kept archives of his work. And in that way, even though he was kind of well known in his moment, he also was forgotten in many ways until rather recently. And then suddenly in the last 5 years, there have been like 6, 7 books on Gordon Matta Clark. because people are interested in unbuilding right now. And whether you've asked yourself this question or not, we're all somehow saying, how do we take this down? You know, how can we take things apart? And I do think that this is a kind of, his practice is one way of sort of symbolizing that question. Let's move on and we can have a chat. Yeah,
thank you so much for a great paper and and linking into the earlier close encounter, and that helped me understand that better and come back to your work in a new way. You don't have to read Heidegger, just go to a land, I have a question because I can see that maybe the fault that many of us would have would be, look, we've tried critique. Critique is at the heart of modernity. It's a refusal. It's a front and center. And in fact, this is a very utopian idea. Let's break everything. The accelerationist were telling us this a decade ago. Let's break everything, and things will get better. That's not the mood at the moment. The nihilism that we're seeing pervasive everywhere is break it. There's no after. There's nothing coming. It is an apocalypse. The kids are being shot. The earth is going away. Everything is breaking down. We don't need to push it any farther. And there's an ethical response to the others that we see all around us who are being destroyed in this machinery. We don't need a further push into that nihilism and that machinery. And so maybe you could talk about, like, I know that's a bit of a reflex, but how you would negotiate that, because to say let's make it worse, the narrative make it worse so that after there's a glimmer and it gets better. But I don't have that anymore. It's just going away.
look.
Right? Yeah, but thank you for the talk. That's great. Sorry.
Look, the idea that, like, oh, well, when we have an obligation, we have an ethical obligation to make things better. How's that working? How's that working? Really, honestly and truly, ask some young people whether they think that with all this rhetoric about I'm doing this for my children, what are you doing for your children? You're gobbling up real estate, making it impossible for young people to ever buy a home, while continuing to say that having a house is the only metric by which success is measured, or the only way to guarantee your safety and shelter. Like, there are all kinds of things we could be doing other than patting ourselves on the back for making things better. The framework here is world within which certain ideas of betterment and improvement and development have taken shape, taken form, and currently govern us as much as we are governed by, right-wing extremists. We're also governed, this has been an insight repeatedly, that we are governed also by liberal benevolence, particularly white liberal benevolence that believes that in holding on to something, it will make a better world. And I'm not saying, yes, just keep throwing all the plastic away, make it worse until we get to the point of collapse. That's the accelerationists. And the accelerationists believe that we're not in the worst possible place yet, that we have to accelerate to get there. We don't, as you've said. But there are many, many different responses we can have to this moment, this crisis. So, for example, when I'm showing you images of houses being torn down, I'm not literally saying go and tear down a house. I'm saying in the ruins of a house, there are little glimmers of other things that we could do in terms of providing shelter. So, and these are not impossible things to do. We could have shared housing, the way that, for example, in Germany, people do have shared housing, where you don't buy an apartment for a ridiculous amount of money. You buy into a building for a small amount of money, and you share the costs. There are lots of different ways we could organize sharing living, right? There are different ways that we could organize the circulation of money and wealth. We don't have to have these taxes that make sure that wealthy people pass all their crap on to their undeserving children, for example. There could be ways in which you say, when you die, all your stuff goes back into the system. There are 1,000,001 ways we could do things differently, but we live with a structure that is remarkably resilient, and therefore it has to be broken somehow. And I'm not a good enough either philosopher or political thinker to exactly pragmatically say how that will happen. But I can point to some projects that are deeply interested in unmaking, where then other opportunities.
Like re-educating myself, right? And so I think this is a clear example of, and when we teach, right, I used to think you've got to teach students Shakespeare because you have to give them the cultural capital so that when they go out, they'll get a job. That's betterment, right? That's the notion that, well, the best I can do for you as a student is to help you make them. That's not the case anymore. We are living in a time where you could actually, Calvin Warren's a great example. He's a success because he's hijacked Heidegger, right? He's pulled it apart. It's actually a bizarre, crazy, terrible, in some ways a shocking reading of Heidegger, right?
Right.
But that's what makes it a good book.
Yeah.
Right? So my comment really is, this is a concrete example of what we can do as academics, as people who cite, but as people who teach, right? These are, like, I'm going to steal all these examples, right?
Yeah.
Because, and that's what happens. Suddenly, this, you know, you said this is someone you've never heard of. Well, we now have heard of them, right? And now when we have to come up with it, when I say steal them, I'm not going to steal your talk. But like when I'm teaching, yeah, thank you, I'm with my good, because I've got this thing next week. But when we're teaching, and this is the crucial, this is the world we're unmaking, right? And there's a world where there's no Shakespeare and Milton.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard for me to get my head around.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to get my head around, but that's what unworlding is, right?
Yeah.
Which is not to say this is ruin, right? But it's the ruins. This is refusing our world, right?
Yeah.
This is not, just a comment.
Yeah, and these are both Linus and Kian. These are students I've worked with. You know, these are not people who are already well known in the New York art scene or something. I just was lucky enough to encounter their work because they were at my seminar, and they asked me, would you write something about my work for a show? You know, and then you, exactly as you're saying, Claire, in the process, you're pulled out of your frame by the work. You know, it's a complete reversal of the pedagogical principle. And that's important. Also with Beverly Buchanan, it's like, you know, yeah, of course some people know who Beverly Buchanan is, but Beverly Buchanan is placed in any pantheon. And it's being placed in a pantheon that allows people then to genealogically make sense. And so this is exactly right, that when you pull away from the citational ecology, you also cease to understand the world. And only then can there be any kind of new thought. And I'm not saying this is new, this is all derivative too, okay? I don't think I'm particularly original in terms of the ideas, but it's more the assembly. I'm just trying to assemble something where many different people are saying, not another world is possible, but can we unworld on behalf of thinking differently? Yeah. I saw Nat and then you.
I'm going to stand just so people can hear. I have a question that may seem like it might kind of go against the grain of what you're saying, but something I see in the examples that you presented, and maybe it's a question that you might call, what about the intimacies of unworlding, which feels like also a question about scale and temporality. Because the example of the mushroom in some ways is not the example of the works of art from either Jemison or Baltrop or the other works in the Black art tradition, because going back to your earlier questioner, the mushroom presumes the act of destruction and then. But there's something simultaneously happening with the intimacies, and they're very queer intimacies of unworlding that you're describing, that are at the scale of the human ethic of care, whereas the system destruction that you're aiming for seems to take place alongside or simultaneously with the development or these examples, whether it's Jemison's polyamory or the men nested in in the kind of scenes of the pier who seem so small by comparison. And there's something about the scale amplification that we're trying to accomplish at the same time as the act of unworlding, right? To kind of these small things that seem like they've been always there as part of history that could somehow be amplified, or maybe that takes away the spirit of the unworlding, though, to kind of think of there is an act of world making that takes place through unworlding. And so that's why I wonder whether it might seem like it works against the grain of the overall thrust of your point, but there does seem to be something there nascent in your examples about the queer intimacies and the trans intimacies of unworlding. Even that example of the trans character man in surgery, right? That it feels very intimate, right? This body being cared for, and this, it seems like even if we advocate for the aesthetics of collapse, and I think that's right, or unworlding, it doesn't seem to somehow destroy the occasion for ethics or intimacy or sexuality or the care, the interrelations of care, right? And it just seems to be there in the argument, but I don't know if that's something you're also articulating or whether that's just me reading into your archive.
That's very perceptive, because this is a painting about a kind of trans ethics of care. That's exactly what it is, because Linus had all of his friends who had taken care of him in the aftermath of the accident where he lost his arm, be the models for the various medical personnel in the painting. So you're absolutely right, that it is also kind of describing an ethics of care that is modeled on this caring painting of Jesus being pulled down from the cross, but is also unmaking that painting. Like what if instead of Jesus coming down from the cross, this was the iconography with which you built world, right? Was the trans man being cared for in the aftermath of both a surgery for an accident and a surgery for gender reaffirmation? What if this became world as opposed to Christ, right? These are the questions of scale. And scale is a huge part of Anna Singh's book, and I don't even pretend to understand some of her arguments about scale in that book. They're very particular, because she'll scale out to the whole commodity chain that the Matsutake mushroom takes, place within, follows it from Japan to Oregon and in between, and then talks about like one person going and looking for the mushroom and the relationship between that mushroom and the other species that exist around it. So it's that ability to scale in and out without disregarding the small. And this is where, I don't love all of his stuff, but the idea of the hyperobject from Tim Norton, sorry, it is helpful to say that there are tiny scales that we can barely see, the virus or whatever, and then there are large scales like weather that we cannot control, and that those scaled up and down objects are constantly part of our world that we ignore. Like, think about the virus. Of course this was going to happen, right? And yet it's a bit like the financial collapse of 2009. Of course it was going to happen, but why were there no economists lining up to say, well, this is what's going to happen. This whole market is about to fall. I think there was like one guy saying it, right? Even though we could have all said to each other, I think this market is really inflated, something's going to give, right? Yeah, something's going to give. Or, wow, that SARS-2 virus a few years ago, do you think there might be another version of this, right? We've all known this. We all knew it. And now it's like monkeypox, what fresh hell is this, right? And apparently it's spreading particularly among gay men in the Canary Islands, I read today. Thank you, Grindr, right? But that's another kind of scale, Grindr, the very app that replaces the cruising in the piers, right? And says, oh, how homophobic that gay men are being prevented from finding each other. Let's upload the algorithm of cruising, make billions of dollars, and gay men all around the world can endlessly be having sex. And well, bravo, good, I'm glad, but at the same time, there are also prices to be paid at the level of scale for these new intimacies, to build on what you're saying now. And we're clearly not understanding any of these routes of transmission, whether it's capital virus, weather, or whatever, they are all outside of human ken. And this is the alarming piece, especially because humans continue to put themselves in the center of the universe and believe that we are somehow the people who understand. You had your hand up.
Yeah, that was incredible. Trying to wrap my head around it, and also my comment / question is probably going to be pretty incoherent, but that feels almost
Go for
fitting
it.
at this point.
Yeah.
Like well, I was thinking about this morning. I presented my own talk, and there ended up being this whole debate about kind of like objective reality. Is there an objective reality? And then afterwards, a friend asked the question that I was thinking about as well. Like, does it matter if there is one? And so, like you started your presentation by talking about some like quantum mechanics stuff, which I could never seem to shut up about in my own stuff. And I was thinking about the kind of, at least like linguistic contradiction here, where like what we've learned is that human existence, the way that we experience the world, is actually predicated upon collapse. It's predicated upon the collapse of wave functions. While academia, it's weird because like, physics obviously is probing into this frontier of what is inherently kind of unknowable, in a sense, the indeterminacy of kind of the base nature. And yet the rest of academia seems to be pushing toward trying to collapse everything into knowable categories. My basic argument was that trying to get as many perspectives as possible from as many speakers as possible in their own languages, whether that be verbal or otherwise, is maybe a key toward trying to like reestablish like a plurality of understanding. And I'm thinking about it sort of like unboiling an egg, right? Like just like, so I'm wondering maybe what your vision would be of an academy, if such a thing could exist, in an academy where that egg is unboiled, where maybe we aren't trying to collapse things into categories and distinctions and fields and disciplines and all that.
Yeah, exactly. What's your name?
Juno.
Juno, thank you, Juno. That was not incoherent at all. And I'll have to chat with you afterwards about, how to even talk about quantum physics without knowing anything about it, right? And that's just such a good question, because you're obviously a kind of polymath who's able to bring these different strands of inquiry and weave them together, and not very many people are, and that's the problem. Like the idea is that we get this general education, and that then the strands of the general education allow you to move in multiple directions. But of course, despite endless debates about the two cultures of science and the humanities, here we are still stuck in these disciplinary trenches that really, really at this point, which are part of the world in the context of universities, that have to be destroyed. They really, really do. And of course, it falls to people with tenure to do that work of destroying. If there's any reason left for tenure, it should be this unmolding that holds on to the idea that there is something specific to the literary that should stay over here, and something specific to physics that should stay over there. And what's great about that, Benjamin, have you read the Labatut book, Juno? No. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because I couldn't tell whether I was reading a novel or a scientific account. And so I was wait, it's like your question, does it matter whether this is real or not? But then I realized he couldn't know what Heisenberg was thinking on that day in northern Germany, in Helioland or wherever. So then I was like, oh, okay, he's like really like absolutely extrapolating in this very creative way, though. It was a long sequence in which one of them, probably Heisenberg, desires his landlord's young daughter that gets really salacious and weird, right? So there's all kinds of weird stuff going on, and in the end, it is just these 5 guys, just 5 white guys. So you want to unworld that too. But it's not completely on the other side of the universe from Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives, where Hartman is able to reimagine world, and specifically anarchy, from this perspective of young black girls by piecing together what may have happened to some black women the beginning when they moved from the South to New York and Philadelphia and constantly came into contact with social services and the police. And the records that they left through those institutional encounters make up her archive. And through that archive, she then transforms it using poetry into an anarchist account of Black life and of these beautiful experiments that she, radical tradition that seeks to unmake Heidegger, right? And we will take the unmade Heidegger and it will then lead somewhere else. So I think we're all, and Juno, that's a great way of putting it, we're all trying to figure out in some ways, not just like what is to be done in the big environmental picture. Guess what? We're not the people to decide that. I bet none of us are very qualified to figure out what would be a good way forward, environmentally speaking. So let's attend to our little patch and see what we can do in terms of whether it's teaching, as Claire was mentioning, whether it's in terms of this ethic of care that Nat was mentioning, whether it's in terms of these like not interdisciplinary but anti-disciplinary forms that I think Juno is referring to. That's what we're after here. And that should be what we're doing at these kinds of events, making it worse. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I saw you talk and it was so many things I've been thinking about, and I just wondered if you could speak at all about the distinction or where we draw the line, or if we want to draw the line between unworlding and de-worlding, I guess, as the kind of resignation that actually extinction would be better, because when you were talking about those Falcon texts, which I can't wait to read, I was thinking about the kind of trend in a lot of contemporary fiction to kind of photosynthesis novels, right? That like Joseph Lacey's Meat, Han Kang's The Vegetarian, that we have this problem of eating and the actual only way to fix it is if we can photosynthesize, which is really just a resignation that actually humanity is just going to be shit regardless, and we just become soil and become a plant. And so is unworlding like, it's reinvesting, I guess, creation, and is it therefore, can you categorize it as a kind of utopian misanthropy? Does misanthropy come into it at all? I hope that kind of makes some sort of question.
Look, it's more like, it's as if there's a frame that holds certain things in place like patriarchy, right? Such that we can have one mass shooting after another, always by some shut-in guy, some loner dude. But we don't want to talk about patriarchy, and we don't think that we should be thinking about masculinity. We will talk about many, many things, but we will not probably get to the point where we think, wow, do we need to retrain men, right? You can't say that. I mean, we used to say it, actually, then it fell out of fashion. But, like, how many times does one have to be in the same situation? Yes, you could get rid of guns, I mean, obviously, but there are also subjects for whom it seems right that they will take things into their own hands in this particular form. And unworlding is to unseat certain subjects who believe world is for them. World is made for them. World works for them. World supports them. World nurtures them. World pushes them forward. That's in a nutshell what I mean by unworlding. It's not the same as de-worlding. And let's remember there are plenty of people who are not responsible for this particular version of world. So when we only talk in terms of destruction, it's like you're pulling everything. It's like people who are on the receiving end of colonialism and its aftermath are also going down. So it's the re-scripting of world here that I think is to be understood by unworlding. Josh, are you okay with the?
Yeah, I
Let's
mean,
just
are you
take
okay?
the
How about
balance.
2 more, and then I think we'll be at time.
I saw Cressida, and then there's a hand here.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jack, for that talk. That was amazing. It made me think about so many things, some of which I've already been thinking about in a strange kind of orthogonal way. So I'm doing this project on sleep, and we had a really great panel yesterday on sleep. And I mean, sleep is an existential necessity for all humans, but in many ways for all life. And as I was listening to you talk, I thought, here are all of these amazing projects that people have worked so hard under such difficult conditions to enact, right, in art, in architecture, in literature, and so on. And I was thinking about the distinction between having an unwielding project and prescinding from having a project. And I think of sleep as a kind of an existential necessity in the sense that it's, among other things, although it's constantly made not this, it's constantly appropriated or recuperated by various discourses, but it is, in some sense, an experience, a non-experience that's a part of human life that involves prescinding from action, right? Not having a project. And so I think that it's a distinctively temporal part of life that connects to unwielding, but it's not like doing all these great things. So in a way, the question connects to some of the earlier questions that were sort of about political quietism and so on, but this is a more kind of existential version of it, you know? Like, what would it mean for unwielding to just, you said several times, it's about stopping doing things.
Yeah, and I think sleep is in that category of not doing, but recognizing that in not doing, something is happening. Yeah, and that you don't have to, like, you don't have to keep saying what is to be done.
Right.
You know, what is not to be done.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. A lot of my work deals with gender and specifically transness and epistemology and process, with Whitehead talking a lot about physics. I was especially interested in and kind of inspired by your discussion of the physics at the very beginning and uncertainty. I guess I was curious if you could maybe talk about, despite your kind of provoking challenge to philosophers to confront epistemology, what kind of epistemology unfolding might have, or what that will look like, in the sense that with the kind of uncertainty that we're kind of talking about, would we be moving towards irrationality, or a sort of new kind of epistemology that's totally different?
Yeah, and I'll say this quickly because I know there's one more hand up. Thank you for that. It is kind of a negative epistemology that I've written about a little bit anyway in terms of failure, and then in the new book in terms of bewilderment, like thinking through not knowing and being unsure and being bewildered. And I mean, again, you know, Juno might correct me, but I think a lot of what goes under the name of quantum physics is not knowing and yet blundering on. Because the things that you're trying to explain are not really explicable. You know, it's like when you read De Silva. I just read Unpayable Debt. I don't. Do you understand that book? No, I don't. I really don't. But it clearly had an impact on me. I didn't need to understand it for it to be with me. It is with me, you know. And I think that if we were more able to teach that to students, that you want to, in fact, often sit with things that bewilder you without seeking to know. I mean, it goes back to Cressida's point that there's, I can't remember the word that you were using, prescinding.
Holding back.
Holding back, exactly. I mean, again, it's this idea of Hartman methodology of kind of withholding and being much more careful, not careful actually, but just sitting away from those instincts to know and to claim and then to stage, and trying to find these other much quieter forms of being with. Finally then, yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you for this very provocative talk. I was thinking about, going back to what you were saying about scale and temporality, and how the aesthetics of collapse, we tend to think of collapse or ruination as, or even you mentioned the word apocalypse, right, as a spectacle, as catastrophic. And that ruination, like making things better, the question that you asked, how are things going in making it better, well, very, very slowly, right, like glacially slowly. And anyone who's ever been on a committee, and we're academics here, you know how catastrophically slowly even the simplest of things can be. Changing even the simplest of things can be. Similarly, ruination takes place very slowly, and some of the images were about the post-dynamite moment when a building has been blown up or a housing project has been demolished, but just like the mountains around us, the process of erosion is also very, very slow. And because of our awareness of climate change and in the US politics, 2022 midterms, and if not, and fascism, etc., there's an urgency that I'm sure people in every historical moment has, that dramatizes and accelerates both ruination and the impulse to make it better. And I was wondering if maybe just off the top of your head, you could connect sort of temporality, time, and the slowness and the de-dramatization of both ruination and making it better, that slowness.
That's lovely. It probably is a good place to end, in the sense that those photographs by Alvin Baltrop, if you look at that first one, I mean, what you are looking at is exactly what you're describing, which is the imperceptibility of collapse. Like, something has happened with that building in the 10 years since the shipping industry failed. And the building is being sculpted literally by time and by entropy and by gravity. And that's what's creating what Lucas Crawford, Canadian architectural theorist, calls the crumple. And in Beverly Buchanan's terms, you could not create that crumple. Even Frank Gehry could not create that crumple. And so there are processes that we can see in the quiet drama of a building like that, you're right, in terms of the question about scale, would behoove us to pay more attention to. And that's why I'm like, the bodies are, nothing more banal than, humans having sex, really. Like, that's not the charisma of the photograph. The charisma of the photograph is in the fact that as you said, something has happened, something seemingly spectacular has happened, and yet it's happening at a scale that is not perceivable by humans. There again, we cease to understand, we cease to perceive all kinds of activity that is going on around us, and that is also world, right? It just isn't what we've put in the category of world. And so part of this is learning to read that landscape better.
Just want to thank Jack again for that amazing talk. So thank you.